May, 1945. There is a sound to the end of a world. It is not a bang, but an unnerving, profound silence. A silence broken only by the wind whistling through the hollowed-out skeletons of buildings that once defined a civilization. This is Berlin. This is Germany. The 1,000-year Reich has concluded its reign in a mere 12 years of fire and ruin. What is left is not a nation, but a geographical expression of defeat. The external landscape of rubble and ash is a mirror to the internal landscape of the German soul. A terrain of confusion, shame, and a silence so deep it smothers memory. This is not the end of a story, but the beginning of a void. A nation once defined by its deafening rallies and thunderous marches is now defined by its absolute and unsettling emptiness. 0 hour. A concept so immense it is almost metaphysical. It was more than just a moment in time. It was a psychological condition. A moment when the clock was reset, and history had to begin anew from a foundation of absolute devastation. The national infrastructure, railways, bridges, communication lines, the very machinery of government itself, had ceased to exist. Cities like Dresden, once called the Florence on the Elbe, were now testaments to the horrific totality of modern warfare, where the line between combatant and civilian had been incinerated in a storm of fire. The scale of the ruin was biblical, a landscape of apocalypse that stretched from one end of the country to the other, a chilling monument to a failed ideology. The physical destruction was almost absolute, a statistic measured in hundreds of millions of cubic meters of debris. But the destruction went far deeper than stone and steel. Germany was a nation, morally, economically, and spiritually bankrupt. A profound sense of collective guilt and confusion hung in the air, mixed with the acrid smell of ruin. For 12 years, an entire generation had been indoctrinated with a vision of racial supremacy and manifest destiny. Now, they were confronted daily with the undeniable proof of its failure and its boundless criminality. The Allied policy of forcing German civilians to witness the horrors of the newly liberated concentration camps was a brutal, necessary lesson. It shattered the carefully constructed wall of denial, forcing a first, agonizing look into the abyss the nation had created. For the average German, survival was the only ideology that mattered. The grand narratives of the state were replaced by the desperate, daily search for calories. Life was reduced to its most elemental form. The average daily food ration in many areas dropped below 1,000 calories. A slow starvation diet. The black market flourished, a shadow economy where a single American cigarette, an Ami cigarette, became a more stable and trusted currency than the worthless, ink-stained Reichsmark. This was a time of pure pragmatism, of organizing what one needed to survive. The recent past was a nightmare too terrible to confront, and the future was a fog too dense to penetrate. To think too much was a luxury no one could afford. In this landscape devoid of men, with millions dead, wounded, or languishing in Allied prisoner of war camps, the traditional social order was upended. It was the women who began the colossal task of clearing the way for a new beginning. They were the Trümmerfrauen, the rubble women. They were not just laborers, they were the pragmatic matriarchs of Reconstruction. Day after day they formed human chains, passing bricks and stones from hand to hand, salvaging what could be saved, clearing what could not. Their work was methodical, unglamorous, and absolutely essential. They were laying, quite literally, the very first foundations of a new Germany, one brick at a time. As they cleared the ruins, another human tide swept across the ravaged land. The Vertreibung, the expulsion. Millions of ethnic Germans, whose families had lived for centuries in Silesia, East Prussia, the Sudetenland, and other parts of Eastern Europe, were now forcibly driven from their homes. They arrived in the occupied zones with nothing but the clothes on their backs and the trauma of a harrowing journey, often marked by violence and starvation. This was one of the largest forced migrations in human history, adding a refugee crisis of unimaginable scale to the litany of woes and creating new social tensions in a society already at its breaking point. They were strangers in their own ancestral land. The fate of this broken land was not in its own hands. At the Potsdam Conference, in a palace miraculously spared from the fighting, the leaders of the victorious Allies gathered to decide Germany's future. Harry Truman, new and untested after Roosevelt's death, Winston Churchill, the bulldog of Britain, soon to be replaced by Clement Attlee, mid-conference, and Joseph Stalin, the Soviet dictator, whose armies now occupied all of Eastern Europe. The atmosphere was thick, with a mixture of shared victory and burgeoning suspicion. Here, they confirmed the division of Germany and its capital, Berlin, into 4 occupation zones. The stated goals were the 4 Ds: denazification, demilitarization, decentralization, and democratization. But each of the Allies interpreted these terms through their own ideological lens. For the West, democratization meant free elections, a free press, and a market economy. For the Soviets, it meant the imposition of a one-party communist system. The lines drawn on this map were more than just administrative boundaries. They were the fault lines of a new global conflict. And Berlin, a divided city isolated deep within the Soviet zone, was destined to become its most volatile flashpoint. In the Western zones, a crucial policy shift occurred. The initial punitive impulse, embodied by the harsh Morgenthau Plan to deindustrialize Germany, was abandoned. It was replaced by a strategy of reconstruction. The Americans, in particular, realized that a starving, resentful Germany could easily fall prey to communism. The Marshall Plan, a massive economic aid package, was designed to rebuild Western Europe, and a stable, democratic Germany was to be its industrial engine. The strict non-fraternization orders were relaxed. Gestures of goodwill, once unthinkable, began to change the relationship between occupier and occupied, from one of conqueror and vanquished to one of protector and partner. In the East, the Soviets pursued a starkly different path. From their perspective, this was not just punishment, but just and necessary compensation. The German invasion had cost the Soviet Union an estimated 27 million lives and laid waste to its most developed regions. Reparations were a desperate necessity. Heavy machinery, railway lines, and entire industrial plants were systematically dismantled and shipped back to the USSR. While the West sought to rebuild Germany as an ally, the Soviets sought to rebuild their own nation with German resources, ensuring in the process that Germany could never again pose a military threat. The first major flashpoint was currency. By 1948, the old Reichsmark was so devalued that the black market was the only functioning economy. To break this cycle and kickstart legitimate commerce, the Western Allies, without consulting the Soviets, introduced a new stable currency in their zones, the Deutschmark. Its effect was electrifying. The currency reform was a shock therapy that wiped out savings, but also killed the black market. Almost overnight, shop windows that had been empty for years filled with goods. A real economy sputtered back to life. The Soviets saw this unilateral move as an act of economic aggression, a deliberate step to create a separate West German state and draw West Berlin into its orbit. Their response was swift and brutal: the Berlin blockade. On June 24, 1948, all road, rail, and canal access to West Berlin was severed. The city's electricity from the Soviet zone was cut off. Their aim was simple: to use the weapon of hunger to force the Western Allies out of Berlin. West Berlin was now an isolated democratic island, a city of 2 million people held hostage deep inside a Red Sea of communism. The American military governor, General Lucius D. Clay, understood the stakes perfectly, famously stating, "When Berlin falls, West Germany will be next." The West was faced with a stark choice: abandon the city, a catastrophic blow to its prestige and credibility, or attempt to break the blockade militarily, an act that would almost certainly trigger a Third World War. They chose an audacious, almost unthinkable third option: to supply the entire city from the air. The Berlin Airlift, or Luftbrücke, was a logistical feat that military planners had deemed impossible. It was a monumental gamble against time, against the harsh German winter, and against constant Soviet harassment in the air corridors. For nearly a year, this air bridge filled the skies. At its peak, a plane was landing at Tempelhof Airport every 63 seconds, 24 hours a day. The constant drone of engines became the city's heartbeat. The airlift did more than just deliver food and coal. It delivered hope. It transformed the image of the Western Allies in German eyes. The former bombers were now saviors. The children of Berlin called the planes Rosinenbomber, raisin bombers, for the candy dropped on tiny parachutes by pilots like Gail Halvorson. This small gesture was a masterstroke of public relations, a symbol of human connection that transcended the grim geopolitics of the blockade. It showed that this was not just about holding territory, but about supporting people. It was a powerful narrative of freedom and generosity against tyranny and deprivation, a narrative that resonated around the world. By the time the Soviets lifted the blockade in May 1949, admitting defeat, the airlift had delivered over 2.3 million tons of cargo. It was the first major victory for the West in the Cold War. It had not only saved West Berlin, but it had psychologically and politically forged the new Federal Republic of Germany as a firm and grateful partner of the West. The division of Germany was now cemented in steel, resolve, and shared adversity. Just weeks after the blockade ended, the Federal Republic of Germany, or West Germany, was founded, with the quiet university town of Bonn as its provisional capital. Its first chancellor, Konrad Adenauer, a stern patriarchal figure and a staunch anti-communist, pursued a clear and unwavering policy of Westbindung, unshakable integration with the Western Alliance. He anchored the new republic in NATO and the emerging European Economic Community, believing that Germany's only path to sovereignty and security was through complete alignment with its former enemies. Under the guidance of economics minister Ludwig Erhard, West Germany adopted a social market economy, a potent hybrid that combined free market capitalism with a strong social safety net and cooperative labor relations. The result was the Wirtschaftswunder, the economic miracle. A skilled and motivated workforce, combined with Marshall Plan aid, turned a nation in ruins into Europe's leading economic powerhouse. The Volkswagen Beetle, an affordable and reliable car, became the ultimate symbol of this newfound prosperity, mobility, and middle-class confidence. For a generation of West Germans, this relentless focus on work and material success became a form of collective therapy. Prosperity became a kind of substitute for a difficult confrontation with the recent past. The mantra was, bauen, nicht reden, build, don't talk. The new department stores, filled with consumer goods, were temples to a future that was determined to be different, more comfortable, and safer than the catastrophic past. 5 months after the founding of West Germany, the Soviets established their own state, the German Democratic Republic, or East Germany. Led by the rigid Stalinist Walter Ulbricht, the GDR defined itself as the first anti-fascist state on German soil. This claim became the central pillar of its state ideology, a powerful tool used to justify one-party rule and dismiss any form of dissent as a resurgence of fascism. A different kind of society was being constructed in the East. All industries were nationalized. Agriculture was forcibly collectivized into large state-run farms, and every aspect of life, from education to leisure, was regimented by the Socialist Unity Party. Grand military parades and ubiquitous propaganda posters proclaimed the superiority of the socialist system, creating a public facade of unity and progress that often masked a grim private reality of shortages and conformity. Dissent was impossible and dangerous. Every aspect of life was monitored by the Ministry for State Security, the infamous Stasi. It grew into one of the most pervasive surveillance apparatuses ever created, with tens of thousands of official employees and hundreds of thousands of unofficial informants. It was a secret police force that turned friends, neighbors, and even family members against each other, creating a pervasive climate of fear and suspicion. Its goal was not just to police the state, but to police the mind. The oppression did not go unchallenged. In June 1953, a strike by East Berlin construction workers protesting impossible new work quotas erupted into a nationwide uprising. For a brief, hopeful moment, the regime teetered as hundreds of thousands took to the streets demanding free elections. But the revolt was brutally crushed by Soviet tanks. It was a clear and bloody message to the German people and the world. The state ruled by force, not consent, and its existence was guaranteed by Soviet armor. After the crushing of the 1953 uprising, with open resistance proven futile, many East Germans chose a different form of protest. They left. The one place this was possible was through the open, four-power city of Berlin, a bizarre loophole in the Iron Curtain, where one could simply take a subway or a short walk from the communist eastern sector to the capitalist west. By 1961, nearly 3 million people, a sixth of the GDR's population, had voted with their feet. Crucially, these were often the youngest, the best educated, and the most skilled. Doctors, engineers, scientists, and academics. This brain drain was a demographic and economic catastrophe that the East German regime could not survive. The self-proclaimed workers' paradise was bleeding out its future. The state decided it had only one option left: to turn itself into a prison. In the pre-dawn hours of August 13, 1961, under the code name Operation Rose, East German police and military units sealed the border between East and West Berlin. Streets were torn up, subway lines were severed, buildings on the border were bricked over, and coils of barbed wire were unspooled across the heart of the city, separating families and neighborhoods with brutal finality. The iconic image of the young border guard, Konrad Schumann, leaping the half-finished barbed wire barrier symbolized the desperation of the moment. It was a spontaneous, individual choice, a leap from one world into another, a last gasp bid for freedom before the prison was complete. His flight to the West became an enduring symbol of the human spirit's refusal to be caged. What began as barbed wire morphed over the years into a formidable and complex system of fortification. The Berlin Wall became a 96-mile-long concrete barrier, complete with hundreds of guard towers, anti-vehicle trenches, beds of nails, and a barren, flood-lit death strip. The East German government called it the anti-fascist protection rampart. Willy Brandt, the mayor of West Berlin, gave it its true and lasting name: the Wall of Shame. For the next 28 years, the wall stood as a brutal scar. It was the ultimate symbol of the Cold War's cruelty. A concrete prison wall built not to keep enemies out, but to keep a country's own people in. Makeshift memorials on the western side, like this simple cross, served as constant, somber reminders of the more than 140 people who would die trying to cross it. Perhaps the most famous was Peter Fechter, a teenager who was shot and left to bleed to death in the death strip in full view of the world's media. The world protested. In June 1963, U.S. President John F. Kennedy visited the divided city and delivered one of the most powerful speeches of the Cold War. In front of a massive, adoring crowd, he declared American solidarity with the city's plight. His final, electrifying declaration, "Ich bin ein Berliner," I am a Berliner, was a profound moral and political guarantee that the United States would not abandon them. Yet, even as the concrete hardened, politics began to thaw. In the late 1960s, West German Chancellor Willy Brandt, once the defiant mayor of Berlin, initiated a new and controversial policy, Ostpolitik. It was a radical shift, moving away from the policy of confrontation and towards engagement. Based on the principle of change through rapprochement, it aimed to improve relations and human contact. Brandt's symbolic kneeling at the Warsaw Ghetto Monument in 1970 was a profound gesture of humility and reconciliation, signaling a new model of German leadership on the world stage. The 1980s saw a re-escalation of Cold War tensions, But a new, reform-minded leader, Mikhail Gorbachev, had taken power in the Soviet Union. In 1987, US President Ronald Reagan, speaking at the Brandenburg Gate, just meters from the wall, issued a direct and theatrical challenge. It was a piece of political showmanship, but it captured the changing mood. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. The true catalyst, however, came not from presidents, but from the people. Gorbachev's signal that the Soviet Union would no longer use force to prop up its satellite regimes emboldened citizens across Eastern Europe. In East Germany, centered in the city of Leipzig, peaceful Monday demonstrations began at the St. Nicholas Church. Week by week, the crowds grew from hundreds to thousands, and then to hundreds of thousands. Their chant evolved from the personal plea, "Wir wollen raus, we want out," to the revolutionary political statement, "Wir sind das Volk, we are the people." It was a direct and powerful rebuttal to the party's claim to represent them. The regime was faltering. The final crack in the dam came when reformist Hungary, in the summer of 1989, opened its border with Austria. This created an escape hatch. Thousands of East Germans on vacation drove their sputtering Trabant cars to Hungary and simply walked to freedom in the West. The East German state was hemorrhaging its population, and its authority had completely evaporated. The prison walls were becoming porous. The end, when it came, was a historical accident, a moment of pure bureaucratic farce. On the evening of November 9, 1989, a mid-level party official, Günter Schabowski, was tasked with announcing a minor change in travel regulations at a live press conference. Flustered and poorly briefed, he mistakenly announced that East Germans were free to travel abroad. When a reporter asked when this would take effect, Schabowski shuffled his papers and stammered the fateful, unscripted words, "As far as I know, immediately, without delay." The news, broadcast live, spread like wildfire. Within hours, massive, disbelieving crowds had gathered at the checkpoints along the Berlin Wall, tentatively at first, then with growing confidence. The border guards, overwhelmed and without clear orders from the collapsing regime, faced a choice: open fire on their own people, or open the gates. At the Bornholmer Strasse checkpoint, the officer in charge made the historic decision. He opened the gates. The wall had fallen. The scenes that followed were of pure, unadulterated joy. A nation, divided for a generation, was celebrating its impromptu reunion on the very symbol of its division. Strangers from east and west embraced, wept, and shared champagne. People climbed atop the wall at the Brandenburg Gate, dancing and chipping away at the hated concrete with hammers and chisels. It was a party at the end of history. The fall of the wall was the beginning, not the end. The political process of Wiedervereinigung, reunification, was driven at a breathtaking pace by West German Chancellor Helmut Kohl, who saw a historic window of opportunity. Through skillful diplomacy, he secured the agreement of the four victorious Allied powers in the 2+4 agreement, which formally ended their post-war rights and restored full sovereignty to Germany. On October 3, 1990, less than a year after the wall fell, Germany was officially one country again. But fusing two vastly different economic and social systems proved immensely difficult and painful. The shock therapy of privatization in the East led to mass unemployment and a sense of being colonized by West Germans, who were often perceived as arrogant, Besserwessis, know-it-alls. A solidarity surcharge tax was levied on Western Germans to fund the colossal cost of Reconstruction. For years, a Mauer im Kopf, a wall in the mind, persisted, a testament to the different life experiences, mentalities, and resentments forged over 40 years of division. Today, more than 3 decades later, Germany stands as a single, vibrant, and democratic nation at the heart of Europe. The decision to move the capital back to Berlin and to renovate the historic Reichstag building was deeply symbolic. Its new glass dome, designed by architect Norman Foster, was placed directly above the parliamentary chamber. It allows the public to literally look down upon their elected representatives. A powerful architectural metaphor for transparency, democracy, and a commitment to never again allow power to be wielded in secret. The journey from the ashes of 1945 has been one of pain, division, resilience, and ultimately, unity. The Brandenburg Gate, once a symbol of Prussian military might, then a tragic backdrop for a city and a world torn in two, now stands as a beacon of an open and peaceful continent. The story of post-war Germany is a powerful and ongoing testament to the idea that even the deepest national wounds can heal, that walls built of concrete and fear can fall, and that a nation, by honestly and painfully confronting the darkest chapters of its history, can find its way back to the light.